There is a number that should change how you think about every meal you eat. 40%. That is the share of all fresh fruits and vegetables consumed in the United States that come from Mexico. Not a niche category. Not a specialty product. The tomatoes, the cucumbers, the bell peppers, the avocados, the berries, the squash, the chili peppers. 4 out of every 10 pieces of fresh produce on your plate, in your refrigerator, in your grocery cart, grew in Mexican soil, was picked by Mexican hands, was packed in a Mexican facility, and crossed a border that politicians treat as a crisis and the American food system treats as a lifeline it cannot function without. Nobody planned this. There was no government program, no corporate strategy, no master plan drawn up in a boardroom somewhere that said Mexico will become the produce supplier for the most powerful economy in the world. It happened because of geography and climate and the particular stubbornness of farming families who understood something about the land they were standing on that the rest of the market was slow to recognize. And it happened because of a border. Not despite the border but because of it, because the line between the United States and Mexico happens to sit at the precise point where the growing season on one side ends and the growing season on the other side begins, where American fields go quiet in November and Mexican fields come alive, where the supply that American consumers expect year-round can only be maintained by crossing that line with trucks full of tomatoes and cucumbers and bell peppers every single day of the year. The geography is the foundation of everything. The state of Sinaloa sits on the western coast of Mexico between the Sierra Madre Occidental Mountains and the Pacific Ocean. It is a narrow strip of coastal plain, fed by rivers coming down from the mountains, sitting at a latitude that produces winter temperatures warm enough to grow warm-season vegetables outdoors when every field in California and Florida and the American South has gone dormant. Sinaloa's winter is American agriculture's off-season. The two growing calendars interlock almost perfectly, which means that a supply chain built across the US-Mexico border can deliver fresh tomatoes to American consumers in January in a way that domestic American production simply cannot. This is not a trade relationship built on cheap labor, though labor costs are part of the economics. It is a trade relationship built on the fundamental fact that the sun shines differently on different parts of the earth at different times of year, and the families who figured out how to exploit the difference built one of the most important food supply networks in the world. The border crossing at Nogales, Arizona is where most of this flows through. Nogales is a city of about 20,000 people on the American side, another 200,000 on the Mexican side, sitting in a desert valley in southern Arizona that would be completely unremarkable except for what passes through it. Nearly 5 billion pounds of fresh produce cross through Nogales every year. 5 billion pounds. The port of entry there processes more fresh fruits and vegetables than any other border crossing in the Western Hemisphere. More than 100 produce companies operate in the Nogales area. The refrigerated warehouses that line the industrial parks north of the crossing form the cold chain infrastructure that keeps Mexican produce fresh as it moves from Sinaloa farms to Chicago supermarkets and Boston restaurants and New York bodegas. The city exists almost entirely because of this trade, and the trade exists because of what families in Sinaloa and Sonora and Baja California figured out about their land 100 years ago. The families are the part of the story that never gets told. The produce industry in Mexico is not dominated by corporations in the way that American agriculture is increasingly dominated by corporations. It is dominated by families. Multi-generational farming families who have been working specific plots of land for decades, who have accumulated knowledge about soil conditions and microclimate and pest pressure and variety selection that no agronomist can replicate from a textbook, who have built relationships with American buyers that are decades old and that operate on a trust and reliability that no contract can fully capture. These families are the actual infrastructure of the US-Mexico produce trade. The trucks and the cold storage and the border crossing are the visible infrastructure. The families are the invisible infrastructure, and they are the reason the system works. The story of the Crisantes family is the one that most fully illustrates what 3 generations of family commitment to a single piece of land can produce. It starts in the 1920s when a Greek immigrant named Miguel Crisantes Gatziones arrives in Mexico with nothing, lands in Culiacan, and plants tomatoes on a plot he calls Campo Santa Fe. He does not speak Spanish. He does not have money or connections or expertise in Mexican agriculture. He has the immigrant's most fundamental asset, which is the willingness to start from zero because zero in a new place is still better than standing still in the old one. He learns the soil. He builds relationships with distributors on the American side of the border. He drives his harvests north to Nogales in trucks. He does this for decades, quietly, without recognition, building the foundation of something he will never fully see. His son Theojerry takes the farm and adds to his father's stubbornness a formal education. He goes to UC Davis in California, one of the great agricultural universities in the world, in the 1960s, a decade when everything about American agriculture is being questioned. He reads Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, the book that documented with meticulous scientific precision how synthetic pesticides were moving through ecosystems and destroying them from the inside out. He comes back to Sinaloa with a conviction that grows stronger through the following decades, that the way the industry is farming is going to cause serious damage if nobody changes course. In 1990, he converts the entire family operation to certified organic production. The American organic market barely exists. His competitors think he is destroying what his father built. He is building what his children will need. He is right. The third generation, brothers Ricardo, Theojerry Jr. and Adrian, takes what their grandfather planted and their father protected and builds it into something continental. High-technology greenhouse facilities in Sinaloa and Sonora. A growing operation on American soil in Amado, Arizona, just north of Nogales, eventually exceeding 1 million square feet of climate-controlled growing space. In 2013, the Amado farm becomes the first fair trade certified farm in the United States, setting the ethical labor standard for an entire industry in the country that their grandfather first shipped tomatoes to in a truck from Culiacan. The family that started with a machete on a plot of Mexican earth ended up defining what responsible agriculture looks like in America. But the Crisantes are one family inside a transformation that involves hundreds of families across multiple Mexican states. In Sinaloa alone, the protected agriculture sector, meaning greenhouse and shadehouse production rather than open field, grew from essentially nothing in the 1990s to over 100,000 acres by the 2020s, making it one of the largest concentrations of high-technology greenhouse production in the world. The families who built those greenhouses did so with capital accumulated over generations of open-field farming, with technical knowledge developed through decades of trial and error on specific plots of land, and with the commercial relationships they had built with American buyers who needed reliable year-round supply of high-quality organic produce and were willing to pay a premium for it. The avocado story runs parallel to the tomato story but with its own particular arc. The Michoacán Highlands, a mountainous region in west-central Mexico, produce the overwhelming majority of Mexican avocados, which now account for 91% of all avocado imports into the United States. American avocado consumption per person climbed from 2.1 pounds annually in 2000 to 8.7 pounds by 2020, an increase so large and so fast that it restructured the economics of an entire agricultural region in Mexico. The families growing avocados in Michoacán in 2000 were operating small-scale orchards serving a domestic Mexican market and a modest export trade. By 2020 they were operating in one of the most commercially valuable agricultural sectors in North America, supplying a product that had become a cultural staple in American cuisine in a way that no one had predicted and that the families themselves had largely not anticipated. They had planted avocado trees because avocado trees grew well on their land. The American food culture's sudden and apparently insatiable appetite for the fruit was something that happened to them rather than something they planned for, and they scaled their operations to meet it as fast as the trees and the capital and the labor would allow. The berry sector tells a similar story. Baja California and Sonora and Jalisco have become among the most important strawberry, blueberry, blackberry, and raspberry producing regions in North America, supplying American supermarkets with fresh berries year-round in a way that California production alone could not sustain. The berry families, many of them smaller operations than the large tomato and avocado growers, built their businesses through the 2000s and 2010s as American consumer demand for fresh berries expanded dramatically and as the cold chain infrastructure that allows fragile soft fruit to travel from Mexican fields to American tables without spoiling improved to the point where it became economically viable. What all of these stories share is a pattern that the individual stories obscure when you look at them separately. The pattern is this. A farming family in a Mexican state with favorable growing conditions begins producing a crop for the American market. The initial operation is modest. The family learns the crop, learns the logistics, learns what American buyers need and how they need it delivered. The relationships deepen. The family invests in better production technology, better post-harvest handling, better cold chain infrastructure. The operation scales. The family develops a brand or a quality reputation that allows it to command premium prices. A second generation joins the business with formal education in agronomy or business or both. A third generation scales it further, potentially building operations on American soil, potentially acquiring distribution capacity, potentially building the kind of vertically integrated food company that controls production, packing, logistics, and sales across two countries simultaneously. This pattern has repeated itself dozens of times across the Mexican produce industry over the past 50 years, and the cumulative result is the 40% of American produce consumption that now comes from Mexico. Not from a corporation that decided to invest in Mexican agriculture. Not from a government program that subsidized production. From families. From the accumulated decisions of hundreds of farming families who looked at their land and their climate and their proximity to the largest consumer market in the world and built something from those raw materials over generations. The political context around all of this is one of the stranger aspects of the story. The US-Mexico border has been the central flashpoint of American political debate for most of the past 30 years. Have no political incentive to examine where their food actually comes from. NAFTA in 1994 accelerated the produce trade dramatically by removing the tariffs and trade barriers that had made Mexican produce more expensive in American markets. Between 1994 and 2020, the value of Mexican horticultural exports to the United States grew from roughly $2 billion annually to nearly $20 billion, a tenfold increase in less than 3 decades. The same agreement that destroyed small-scale corn farming in rural Mexico by opening the Mexican market to subsidized American corn created the conditions for the explosive growth of export-oriented produce farming in the states with the right climate and the right access to the American market. NAFTA did not create the produce trade, but it poured fuel on a fire that had been burning since the first tomatoes crossed the border at Nogales in the early 20th century.